Hello, my name's Dave Garland. I'm the team mechanic for Chain Reaction Cycles World Cup team using the 2011 Nukeproof bikes. Today we're going to be building Lewis Buchanan's race bike. 10mm spacers, one below. Put your upper clamps on and one above like that. So you've got your height adjustment, mark where it needs to be cut. So with the headset assembly now we can pack plenty of grease everywhere. Then if you do power wash and you like power washing your bike, you know, it protects it from that. Okay, so now we're going to fit the new E13 SRS chain device. It's always important that you use Loctite on the bolts because it's something that can always come undone. You should spend as much time as you possibly can getting your chain line correct, because if you do a race and you drop your chain in your race run, it's your whole weekend down the pan. So concentrate on your chain line. Okay, so once we've mounted our chain device and we've got the line perfect with the swing arm, so there's clearance for mud and everything looks like it's lined up good, and you've got your rotation correct for the type of frame you're using. Plenty of grease on the BB shell. Remember, drive side is always a left hand thread, so to do it up, you're undoing it effectively. So always try and do it out by hand because it's very easy to cross the threads, and if you do that you're in a fair world of trouble. A little bit of grease just around the portion where the bearings mount, just to make sure they don't seize, so make sure it goes on nice and easy. Some grease on the left hand crank thread. There you go. Just a little tap to make sure it's home. As you can see, immediately you want to be looking for your chain ring to be mounted exactly in line with your lower jockey wheel, and obviously no rubbing, nice bit of clearance, although the chain ring needs to be as tight as possible against the upper guide to stop the chain actually slapping around. The left hand side BB shell is clockwise, it's the opposite way to the right hand side, so it's the normal way of tightening up. So one thing you have to be sure of is that the left hand crank arm actually goes on far enough. You sometimes have to space out the BB shell slightly, just for different width shells. Normally all downhill shells are 83, but you do have to use spacers to get the width correct, so the cranks don't float laterally like this. Okay, so now we've got our chain device fully fitted, all running very smooth, lined up perfectly. I'm just going to fit the rear mech. Loctite again. The best Loctite to use, by the way, is Loctite 222, which is a non-runny compound blue thread lock, which allows you to undo stuff and do it back up. Okay, so again, with your bar mount threads on the stem, always some grease on the threads that go inside the stem and also on the heads, and the reason for that is you need to get the bars tight enough. Sometimes if you don't use grease on the heads, then they just bind and you think they're tight, but in reality they just bang on the aluminium, so they don't actually get tight enough. So it's really important that you put grease on there. Bars. Hopefully we can thread this bar in. Okay, you can initially just put your bars in, but you know the real setting comes when you got the bike down on the floor. then you can get it accurate and then finally tighten them up. Okay, now we've got our forks. Insert the forks carefully. Put your bump stops on, which will just initially hold the fork in its place so it won't fall out again. And again, with the clamps, absolutely, especially if they're titanium clamps like these on the 888s, 2011s, they've got tie bolts, so you absolutely have to put grease on these threads. So again, on the thread and on the head, that's really important with these Marzocchi forks. So now we're just going to put the brakes and the shifters on. This year we're sponsored by Formula, using the new DH brake. Insert your grips. With lock-on grips, it's a good idea to always make sure the securing bolts or the pinch bolts are pointing away from the rider's grip or away from their vision. Some riders don't like the pinch bolts at the top of the grip for some reason. Sometimes they can feel it through their glove if they move on the grip. So always try and keep the smooth edges of the lock-on grip around the top. Now we're just going to fit the gear cables now, and there's something really important you have to do with a gear cable. It might seem small, but it makes the gears work ever so smooth. When you get your gear cable length correct and you chop your gear cable off, inside, if you can see, the Teflon inner always gets peeled over, so you have to open it back up again like that. If you don't open that back up, then the gear cable, it has two dragging points there and there, so you have to make sure that both ends of your gear cable are open, and then you can insert your sealed end caps. Always use sealed end caps because they keep the dirt out for quite a long time. We're using SP41 gear housing because it's already lubricated inside, so just keeps the gears running smoother for that little bit longer. Okay, initially you just want to connect your inner gear housing up to the pinch bolt on the rear mech. And one really important thing to do is to hold the mech and just shift with the shifter and stretch the cable into the outer housing. So when you eventually come to set your gears up correctly, then they'll work straight away. You won't get any cable stretch. The rider won't come down and say my gears are under shifting or over shifting, because you've pre-stretched the cable into the housing and you just made sure the ferrules all fit tight. Okay, so we put the rear wheel in. What we're going to do now is set the chain line, and we're almost finished with the build. We can put it on the ground, do some measuring, and see what it's like for the first time. Right now, everything lines up really good for the first time. There's an awful lot of downhill bikes out there, or downhill frames, that you have to do a multitude of modifications to actually get the thing to roll properly. So for the first time out, this is pretty good. What you need to do, one of the most important things, is make sure you take as much of the chain away as possible that you don't need. Because we made sure the chain line is perfect and we've got the chain length correct and we set our limits, you see immediately it's shifting good already, and we've got a perfect chain line, nice and free. Right, so when you're setting your front and the rear brake, number one, it's really important that you get the actual caliper in the center of the rotor. That way both pistons will be doing exactly the same amount of work. If you just do it the lazy man's way and pull the brake on and then do the bolts up, you always find that one piston is always doing more work than the other, and that will give you an inconsistent brake, inconsistent pad wear, and loss of power as well. So you just need to make sure that the rotor is in exactly the center of the caliper, and then tighten down your securing bolts. Small bladed screwdriver, just to train the pistons, just to make sure that they're both coming out in the same direction. If one's moving slightly more than the other, then just hold the piston that's moving more and allow the other piston to come out equally, and that will give you an absolutely perfect centralized brake and no rubbing like that. And that's all you need to do. Okay, so all that's left to do now is number one, put the bike on the floor, just check to see how it sits, then tighten up the bars and make sure Lewis is happy with all his control settings, his brake and his shifter, his bar position, seat and seat post position, and that's the build complete. It just leaves for him to go out and test it and just give us his initial feedback.